Happy New Year to everybody and welcome. My name is Chuck Gillespie. I get the joy of co-hosting this with Ryan Wolf from Gallup today. We are starting our 2021 Reimagining Wellness live conversations. We hope to do these on a regular basis. We already have our February speaker lined up and looking forward to letting you know who that is down the road. But today, it is my pleasure and my joy to introduce you to Ryan Wolf. Ryan's with Gallup. Ryan, tell us a little bit about yourself.
You bet. So I've been, like you said, I've been working with Gallup for several years now, 15 or so years. Started in the fitness center, and now I kind of oversee all of our well-being initiatives beyond just physical health and wellness. Um, but yeah, I work for a great company. It's been a blessing to work at Gallup. I get to work with a lot of smart people and researchers who provide our industry some great research and data that we can use. I live in Omaha, Nebraska, so kind of right in the middle of America. That's where our operations headquarters are located. So I have three young boys. They're age 15, 10, and 2. So they keep me and my wife busy and keep our lives pretty interesting. So that's a little bit about me.
That's awesome. You know, I'll tell you, I've only got one child, and she'll be turning 19 next month. Just took her back to college, and I'm not gonna lie, she should have gone back 2 weeks ago. But that's beside the point.
Yes.
But I am, you know, we had a great period of time. Obviously, with the pandemic, she was back home between Thanksgiving all the way through till yesterday. So
Okay.
that's probably part of it. It was just a little too long even for her. And but looking forward to hopefully seeing some things that are going on. Talk us about, just again, when we're thinking about it, let's talk a little bit of pandemic. What is Gallup seeing right now as far as maybe even that return to work philosophy, that piece? Kind of walk us through kind of some of the Gallup data that you're looking at and that you're viewing and saying, how is this going to affect what's going on down the road?
Yeah. So let's start with when the pandemic hit. We've been measuring stress and worry and enjoyment for quite a long time, for more than 12 years. So it was really cool. And maybe some of you have already seen this, but I'll go ahead and share anyway. Stress and worry dropped significantly in those first few weeks, and enjoyment, or sorry, those increased. Enjoyment dropped significantly throughout that first month, but they spiked back pretty quick, which was really good to see. Kind of the most interesting part of the data that we analyzed and recovered during the pandemic was that kind of our overall lives, kind of as we were experiencing them in that moment, kind of it dropped pretty significantly. But our hope, we ask people to rate what your life is going to be like in 5 years. That number stayed true and steady throughout the entire pandemic. So even though it was tough, it was challenging, we needed a lot of resilience, we actually still had a whole lot of hope, which was really positive for me and for anybody in wellness and well-being to see. So that was interesting. We we found that about 50% of American workers are super keen on working from home. It works for them. They like it. The other half, they kind of want to go back, at least some of the time. Maybe not all the time, but some of the time. So we're thinking about that and how we can address that. And managers, 60% of managers say that they are going to allow for more time spent working from home once the health measures and the safety measures kind of drop off someday, hopefully one day soon. So we're thinking about that and how we just address those issues.
So Ryan, I'm going to launch a poll now because I actually have
Cool.
that exact question.
Ha!
How about that? How about for
Okay.
organizations who can offer a flexible work schedule for their employees? which do you feel or foresee as being the one that provides the highest level of well-being? And I think this has been interesting. This is a very similar poll that I did on a LinkedIn poll study, just to kind of get a curiosity question going on from that perspective. And I think it's funny because what I'm seeing already very quickly is that the exact same answers are coming up as what we saw the last, with the LinkedIn poll. We had about 2,000 on the LinkedIn poll that popped over that.
Okay.
This group is actually saying it even a lot larger perspective of that hybrid work week. So I'm going to give you guys about 2 more seconds, and then I'm shutting it down. So there we go. So we're going to end the polling here. And as you guys can see, as I share the results, almost 90% are saying that hybrid work week, that kind of 3 days on, 2 days remote, or vice versa, and so forth. And, there's a lot of people, Heather, I love being at work. I agree. I mean, I miss some of those interactions of day-to-day work. Now, granted, in the job that I'm in, I'm actually 100% remote because my team is in North Carolina and Colorado and Wisconsin, et cetera. But I got to admit that's interesting. And, we had 10 people that did the 4 10-hour work weeks, 12 people that said 100% remote, and 1 person said 100% back to work in the office. Now, I made the joke, of course, of saying something like, if we could just figure out how to assemble a car through my bedroom, we could even get manufacturing hooked into this whole remote workforce.
Exactly. I mean, that's a great point, because we just know that there's not every role can be done at home. There's also those personal characteristics and traits and strengths that we have that might lend to working from home, that might lend to it feeling really good and giving us energy and helping us thrive. Whereas we might have, a job and a personality and strengths that just aren't a great match for it. So we need to think about how we, during this time, how we can really contribute our to our energy level and get more rest other than just sleeping rest. How can we get those other elements of rest back in our lives so we can keep churning out good things through our work?
Ryan, I'm sure you may be in the same boat as I am. I got to admit, between basically March, even February, all the way through 2020, I was actually working more hours because I was home. It was real easy to get up to my desk, up, just up a set of stairs. Luckily, I did have it away from me as much as I possibly could. But I got to admit, I was working extra hours than I thought I wouldn't. But it is a matter of kind of figuring out that whole perspective. How are you and how is Gallup looking at this from maybe even, let's say, a strength finder's perspective?
Yeah, well, we know that those who are utilizing their strengths and those who are more engaged in their work and those who have high well-being, they're able to combat those moments of burnout, and they're able to exude more resilience. We found that even before the pandemic, 70% of people experience burnout some of the time. So during the pandemic, obviously that number anecdotally for sure went up, right? So it's unique how we have to adjust and put in these new rituals in our day to kind of have that separation. For some people it was great, and then for others it was just too hard to separate. And working from home might be challenging enough, but when you throw in all the other crazy elements that occurred throughout 2020, it was just a whole lot of stress for a whole lot of people.
Without a doubt. Hey, a question that came through the chat feature. Curious to know, what data do you have regarding the hybrid environment? For example, it's easy to find people when we know everyone is home and are mindful about meeting, but exclusive on the phone. However, when some are home and some are in the office, how will availability, how do you see availability changing? I love that. That last piece is probably the critical factor. How do you see availability changing?
Oh boy, that is going to be interesting. It'll probably change 100 times between now and next decade. But
The next normal.
yeah, exactly. But I think one key is being really communicative and helping your team and your manager, giving them an expectation for when you can be available, and making sure it's a healthy, reasonable expectation that that's being put upon yourself and others, that even though we're right there, the laptop's right there, and a lot of times, when I leave my workstation here, the laptop comes with me to the couch, but I might not necessarily be working on my Gallup work. I actually have to send some emails to the parents who I coach their sons in basketball. So it's not necessarily me going to be available, even though my green light is on and I'm ready to type.
Absolutely. And let's face it, with the smartphones, the laptops, it's so easy to stay connected. And quite frankly, that for me at least hasn't changed a ton. All I have found is, and again, I'm going to say it this way: I'm also learning to be an empty nester for the first time in 18 years. So I'm filling some of that gap with work. And
Sure.
my wife is an optometrist and works like, later evenings. Like tonight, she's home 7 p.m. So what else am I going to do? I can only walk the dog so many times. And, and I know I'm not going to clean the house, for God's sake. I'm just kidding.
And you've already
Actually do that
watched
too.
everything on your Netflix scroll, so it's just like,
Yeah,
hey.
and yeah, I'm waiting for the Tiger King 2 to come out. It sounds like President Trump may actually pardon Joe Exotic, so we may have a
My
Tiger King
goodness.
2.
Holy cow. Why am I not surprised? It's just
Yeah,
everything is just
exactly.
getting crazier.
So, speaking of getting crazier, some of the things that we're starting to see, at least from the hope perspective, I've heard a lot of epidemiologists, public health officials, and I'll say it this way: all the folks that aren't necessarily trying to scare the holy crap out of us. They're starting to say that there's, assuming that the vaccines continue to go the way they're going, they're starting to get the rollout even faster with some of the new possible opportunities we're moving forward. They're saying that there's a really good chance we may have some good time come this spring, maybe, may actually have some things going on. What are you seeing from the Gallup side of things? Are you seeing a very similar conversation happening? And where do you kind of see maybe that pivot point of, maybe actually seeing some live conversations happen live as opposed to virtual?
Yeah. It's hard to predict, isn't it? It's so challenging. We thought we were going to be back in the office maybe after a month or two, and then when that didn't happen, we thought, okay, well, it'll be in the fall, and that didn't happen. And our leadership is just super hesitant to say exactly when and or how it's going to happen. Fortunately, we have an environment where we have large building, low head count, so it's safe for us to meet if we feel like that's a good idea. It's not happening a lot, but it can happen. But I think we just need to keep being resilient and very flexible with when it might happen, and just keep holding on to hope that it will happen. We just need to keep being patient with it. It's really taught us to be patient. It's taught us to communicate in different ways, and it's brought unfortunately, one of the things I miss the most is kind of the just your informal greetings that I would see. Kind of your loose connections is actually the scientific term for it. If you check that out on your own time, Google loose connections. It really adds to our social well-being. But it's super hard to replicate and make it authentic in this Zoom environment. So I'm looking forward to it happening again. I don't know when it will, but I think we just need to keep trusting the experts and our leaders to tell us, when it will happen, and follow their advice.
Absolutely. And I'm going to launch another poll because I'm just curious again to find out. Again, we're making some assumptions here. So, really look at the question here, assuming that the vaccines are successful and we're looking at a more open, non-pandemic spring as public health officials are hoping. At what point would you be willing to attend a live conference or event? It's a lot of folks that are like, I'm ready now. I'm ready now too. I'm just, I'm hoping that we can kind of do it maybe a little later than that. It's interesting to see a lot of people really picking this sometime in 2022 even. A lot of folks saying not till after July, which works for us, by the way. The national conference,
Yes.
hopefully live, will be
Mm-hmm.
July 28th through the 30th. And by the way, just so everybody knows, one of our keynote addressers is John Clifton. And John is the global managing director, right? Is that his?
Yes.
I don't do titles very well.
Yeah.
Global managing director for Gallup, and obviously the grandson.
He is a fantastic presenter and speaker. I actually grew up with John. He and I went to the same. We went to the same elementary school, same high school.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
And I've gotten to know John over the last couple of years and have gotten a great working friendship and relationship with him as well. So as you can
Nice.
see, everybody, we're looking at probably maybe, there's some maybe Junes, there's some maybe Julys. There's definitely a not till after July. That's the biggest, but it's not by much. And there's a lot of us that are saying, let's wait till 2022. And I'll tell you what, Ryan, this doesn't surprise me too much. How about you?
No, I think this is about what I would have expected. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think what you just said also is that ever famous, if things go better than expected or worse than expected, obviously that shift is going to make or break what's going to happen even this spring and summer.
Mm-hmm.
So that's cool. Like I said, I thought that would just be an interesting, and I'm not gonna lie, it's a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy for us just to make sure that I can not only promote our conference, but this gives us some ideas of how important it is for us to not only look at making sure that we are thinking about it from this perspective, but making sure that we're looking at a hybrid type of model for these conferences, these live events. And I know a lot of the folks that I've talked to, my friends, Karen Mosley over at Hero and others, we're definitely trying to learn from each other. How do we do a hybrid event? Do we have a live one with the hybrid piece going on? And I'm going to be really seriously interested to see how that all works out too.
Yeah, and I was just thinking about diversity and inclusion in here, and
oh yeah,
it will give us a new flavor for inclusivity here. How will we include those who are not comfortable in live events? We need to make sure that we include them.
It's true.
And so I think
that
as
really
leaders,
is a new DEI piece, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. It's got to be. I haven't really thought about it until right now, but
I didn't either.
I think that as leaders in our industry, we should start planning for that right now, and think about how we can make sure that everyone's needs are still being met, and we're including those opinions and feedback and thoughts into everything that we're planning.
Like I said, part of what we were thinking about obviously was we're almost 100% certain that we're not going to have a lot of our international contingency coming in this year. So that was part of it. So it is kind of an inclusive piece from that perspective. But you're right, Ryan. We've really got to be looking at, I'll say it this way, those 73 that were like, I'm not going anywhere until next year. I'm going to wait a whole nother year. Great point. Guess what? That just popped onto our conference committee schedule. Lana, I know you're on here, so make sure that that's on our next conference committee report. Well, cool. So now I know, Ryan, that Gallup's been doing the Wellbeing Index for a number of years, and I know that there hasn't been as much work on that in these last couple of years. But thinking about, and I will say it this way, that has actually been probably the best research that I have used over the last 10 or 15 years, just in the world that I have lived in. Prior to, in the wellness world, being in the HR running wellness programming. How are you seeing some of the Wellbeing Index pieces starting to float more towards, I'll say it this way, the Global Emotions Report, the World Wellness Index? Kind of walk us through some of what you are looking at from your perspective and building out what's basically you need to kind of talk to other folks about.
Yeah. So for about 12 years or so, back when the Wellbeing Index started, you can go check it out at news.gallup.com and check out all the kind of reporting that we had done, the daily tracking that we conducted, the annual reports. They're fantastic, and they really just helped us kind of identify the key factors that drive well-being from for everything that we experience in our life, from our sense of purpose, our relationship, our social well-being, financial security, relationship to our community, purpose and career well-being. So you can check that all out at news.gallup.com and some of those older reports. But now a lot of times what we'll do, instead of that kind of continuous, ritualistic, routine polling, what we do is we do more special projects. And the pandemic was the perfect opportunity to exercise and flex that. So we studied the stress, worry, and enjoyment. Had some great numbers on that, and watched it, tick up and down throughout the first quarter of the pandemic. And then as you're at news.gallup.com, you'll find world poll data and stories and articles, and how we integrate that data that we're conducting throughout the world. And a lot of it's here and domestic, but there's plenty that's international as well. How that gets plugged into reports that are really relevant for us in the wellness and well-being industry, and things like engagement and strengths, and burnout and resilience. And the world poll, I always like to kind of talk about, it's how it got formed back in the kind of earlier part of the 20th century. Our founder, George Gallup, was really interested. He thought somebody asked him a long time ago, what was the most interesting thing that you studied? He did a lot of research in his life, and he said the number one thing that interested him the most was people's happiness. So he was really keen on well-being, and one of his biggest projects that he undertook for well-being, that helped formulate our model and our framework of well-being, was a project that he conducted with his associates in 1958 and 1959. He interviewed more than 400 residents of the United States who were 95 years of age or older. So he affectionately called them the oldsters, and he wrote a whole book about it. And you can find the research that he did online. It's out there. George Gallup, The Secrets of Long Life. So check that out. He had 4 actionable tips and items that he found that were validated statistically in the studies that he did. And it's really timeless research that can be shared and practiced still today. And from there, it just evolved over the decades and almost a century of well-being research.
That's really cool. And I love the fact that it's back in that 1950s model, because as you know, some of the things that we always talk about within National Wellness Institute is that root definition of wellness came from Dr. Halbert Dunn from the 1950s. And it's that whole concept of developing human potential within the environment.
Yeah.
It's exactly what almost Gallup has been living off of, that concept for, since its inception in a lot of ways.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I love the fact that, again, those are those things that really kind of start to make that interconnection, that intersection between true, what we call high level wellness, which is the Halbert Dunn definition, and what Gallup has been doing from that research perspective. I had the good fortune, been about 8 or 9 years to have the conversation with Jim Clifton.
Sure.
And one of my favorite books it's the one he wrote is good God, I just lost it. Whoa.
Is it First Break All the Rules, or is it StrengthsFinder 2.0?
Actually, it was,
is it The Coming Jobs War?
The Coming Jobs War. That's the one. I'm telling you, that was probably one of the best books I have ever read. And it really, it's this whole idea of everybody's just looking for a good job. And if we could actually create 1.8 million good jobs, and then he went in and defined what good jobs were. And by the way, folks, a lot of wellness in this thing. But the whole idea was, I love the philosophy, and it's actually been a philosophy that I've kind of tried to live off of in a lot of ways too, just because, that really is what we're trying to do. We're trying to get people in jobs, and those jobs are, and again, what I loved about the whole book was Jim really talked more in terms about, not necessarily a paid job. It can be somebody that is doing volunteer work. It can be, so that he defined job, in my opinion, in the best way. So I was really appreciative of that. That's for sure. Another question that's being asked here, kind of talk about the relationship that Gallup uses and that even maybe you use from your perspective, that relationship between health behavior, engagement, and well-being.
Okay. Yeah. So we've actually found a lot of really good, strong correlations between engagement and well-being. So there's probably at least a half a dozen great articles at news.gallup.com. And these are all free resources, by the way,
Right.
that I'm sending you. And I don't want to sound like I'm just promoting, just Gallup research on well-being. I encourage you to read everything, anywhere and everywhere that's good, solid research. But there's a lot of great correlation between engagement and well-being. They're very complementary of each other. If you think about, we've already talked about expectations a little bit, but the first Q12 question, which measures engagement, is I know what's expected of me at work, and without really being able to give that a strong 5 out of 5, it's tough to navigate. It was tough before the pandemic. It makes it even harder now when we can't see our managers. We don't have that visual, thumbs up or good cues from our affirming cues from our coworkers and managers. Then it gets deeper, like being able to learn and develop in your role, and being able to utilize your strengths in your role intentionally, and having good friends, or best friend at work, close and strong relationships. I think that's just social well-being right there. Um,
100%.
so so yeah, there are a lot of great correlations. If you could, Dan Witters just wrote a great article on the relationship between engagement and well-being. I just posted it on my LinkedIn post, on a LinkedIn post today. So
Okay.
feel free to connect with me, or just grab that and put it in the show notes, Chuck, to everyone. And it can be a good way to kind of learn how. Let's say you're focused on wellness or well-being, and you haven't necessarily, you're not super familiar with engagement yet. It's a great way to learn about engagement and start thinking about, how can I start layering in these elements of engagement into my wellness and well-being initiatives. And there's just a lot of research to back you up and to do that.
That's awesome. So, and by the way, Q12 is one of my all-time favorites. I got to do it with an organization about 15 years ago, with a grant that I was working through, and
Yeah.
I still to this day, I think the one that always got me was best friend at work,
Yeah.
and then my curiosity went into like overdrive, and I just started to really dig deeper into just that one question,
Hmm.
just because of that curiosity aspect of why was that such a critical factor of success. And the more you started to read into it, it's like, think about it from that engagement perspective. What's a reason to wake up in the morning and go to work? And as we all know, when you think about especially workplace wellness, really the very first vision or mission statement that you need to have is that ever famous, I want to make sure that when we go to work, we're not dreading going to work.
Yeah.
I know
Exactly.
it's the lowest common denominator, but that's
Yeah.
actually where we have to start. And one of the best ways to do that is to make sure that you have that friend, that colleague, that person that, like we talked about earlier, that loose connection, even. But you have to have that deeper connection with that true best friend that you can't wait to see each and every time. And when they're on vacation, you almost feel depressed in a lot of ways.
Yeah. I like to think about, that really authentic best friend who you have. Think about how much just, um, and that can improve your emotional well-being. Because you can share anything with them because you trust them.
Right.
And I can share, my fears and my unsuccessful ventures at work and the things that make me upset. I can vent to this person. I can get this off my chest. And then after about 1 or 2 minutes of talking about it, now I can go back to work and know that I have support, and I can just clear my mind, and start being productive again and feeling good about who I am and what I'm doing. So that's just that's why social well-being and having best friends is so important.
One of the things that I just did a video conference with a professor at Indiana University just recently, and I apologize, her name is leaving me right now, but she did a really cool research study, and I'll pull it up later.
Cool.
But it's on our NWIjournal.com website. But the video was really talking about some research that they had done through their own program, HealthyIU, and the idea was the more the people that were doing physical activity on a very higher engaged perspective were doing it because of the social aspect of it, not necessarily the physical exertion or that feeling of what's going on. The people that were doing it the most were the ones that were connected to others that were doing it alongside of you. You see that throughout business, you see that throughout the community, whether it's physical activity, whether it's this, that, and the other. How do we get there? How do we make sure that we can really understand how important, particularly social engagement and social isolation, are truly affecting wellness?
Well, we need our leaders to make sure that they're providing an environment that's very conducive to friendships and being social and sharing, and also being okay with conflict, and having making sure that when you share your feedback, it's a safe zone, and that you won't be reprimanded for sharing how you feel. It's an open slate to talk about what's really on your mind. If we kind of suppress that, then we're just going to have issues. We're going to have people who are hurting inside and aren't feeling good and aren't realizing their potential at work or with their health.
So, Ryan, think about again, there's so much unknown going forward right now, but think about where the research is taking us. Think about where your data is taking us, the Gallup data is taking us. Um, Maybe even talk a little bit about pre-pandemic and where it was going, and then how the pandemic has kind of shifted how you see the future of work starting to create a next normal.
Yeah, it's how much time do we have? I think that,
Exactly.
well, one thing that's going to be interesting for us in the wellness and well-being sector is that bringing back inclusivity into the conversation here. That um, we're Gallup just signed a partnership with Wellbeing for Planet Earth. It's a Japanese organization, and they came to Gallup last year and talked about how our framework of well-being is great. It's very strong. However, it might not include a lot of Eastern influence and well-being elements that Eastern residents and people in Asia and India and everywhere else are thinking about, kind of low arousal types of well-being, like peace and calmness and harmony and balance. So a lot of times when you think about Western well-being, it's kind of that high arousal emotion like joy and excitement and happiness. And those are great. But what we learned from Well-Being for Planet Earth is that we're kind of maybe missing out on some of those more low arousal emotions that actually give people quite a bit of boost and comfort in their well-being. So we're actually doing the research now in September, on World Peace Day, I think is the day that it's called. We're going to put out our first iteration of that new well-being. And I think it's really going to change the way that we have been planning and strategizing and communicating about wellness and well-being from the past.
That's cool. So, Ryan, I want to kind of give you maybe a little bit of a forum here.
Okay.
Um, what is that? What are those 1, 2, 3, 4 tips? However many you can kind of muster up here in the next few minutes.
Cool.
Um, what are those tips that we need to be thinking about from a workplace perspective, maybe from a community perspective, that we can do now, knowing that there's still a lot of uncertainty, but can help us in moving forward in trying to create that atmosphere, that developing human potential atmosphere, that functioning optimal in the environment atmosphere. What are those one, two, or three things that you would tell this group they need to be focused on?
Okay, good. And for those who are listening here, he did not plant this question prior to the call. So this is maybe hot, but hot take coming at you. But I think that we can think about a little bit more about the mission and the mission and purpose of our organization, and try to help people in their role um, figure out ways that they are actually contributing to that greater mission and purpose of the organization. So I think that's important. I think it's important that we don't have just a communication channel with just the employee population, but I think we also need to have a really healthy channel of communication with the executive team and the leaders of the organization, and particularly the managers, because they account for 70% of the difference and the variance in employee engagement. So if we can coach up our managers and support them, your work can be amplified rather than just speaking to only employees. Now we need to keep that channel open, but we can just, intensify and amplify the communication that we have with managers.
And Ryan, if there was just a book out there about that, I don't know, by maybe a Jim Clifton or a Jim Harder,
Yes,
called It's the Manager,
it's the manager. Yes.
which, by the way, is a fabulous book. I just finished it. And everybody, you can't realize this, I'm a Gallup nerd. My apologies to everybody else, but it was a fantastic book.
Yeah, it's really good, and so I obviously recommend it. If you can't, if you don't have the resources to buy it right now, definitely just do some searching on our website. There's a lot of kind of vignettes or sub articles from that book that you can start dabbling and learning about the manager's influence on our organizations, and think about the ways that you can really nurture those relationships. Maybe it's with your own personal manager. Start there, and then ask your manager, hey, would you be able to help me talk with the other managers in our department? And then from there, it can spread into, okay, department manager, could you help me talk, and maybe I could present or give some ideas and tips to the other department leaders, and they could funnel it down. So so I think there's a lot to learn, even just through the website that's free. There's a whole nother world of channeling and communicating that we can do that can make a big difference for people. Oh, you're on. Yep.
Wow. By the way, I posted on LinkedIn there this weekend that we've come to the realization that these um, Zoom calls are a lot like the modern day seances. Somebody's wanting to come in. Elizabeth, can you hear us? It made me laugh, so I put it out there. A lot of folks are even putting out there. Dr. Murthy, our incoming Surgeon General's book, is also a great one, particularly on loneliness and so forth. I definitely highly recommend that one. And again, It's the Manager is the name from called, and it's from Jim Clifton and Jim Harder.
Right.
If you just type those in, you'll be amazed. And Ryan, quit giving the free stuff away. I will tell you that book is definitely worth the money. I did it on audiobook too. So, if you got an Audible, just hit one of your credits and boom, it comes up and away you can go as well.
Yeah, I mean, it was a well thought of book because of the content, but it was also really well structured. There's 52 chapters. Each chapter is just 2 pages or so.
Yep.
So you can it wasn't necessarily meant to be read cover to cover,
No.
but kind of go to the most pressing issue that you have right now, go straight to that chapter, read 2 pages about it, put the book away, and go to work.
Heck, the index was almost as long as the whole book.
I know, right?
That's what made me laugh about it too. That's for
Uh-huh.
sure. So, well, Ryan, kind of give us some final thoughts. Where, you've given some amazing tools here, some amazing thoughts going forward. Give me your final thoughts, and then I've got one more poll question I want to throw out to everybody.
All right. So yeah, final thoughts. I think let's keep learning. Let's keep being open and inclusive to a lot of new ideas and thoughts from all sorts of people. Let's think about think about what your strengths are as an individual and identify what you're really good at, and ask people around you who you work with, what do you think I'm good at, and start identifying those and start really molding and your job, and hopefully you have some autonomy and some freedom to keep working on those projects that give you good energy. Because when you are working on projects and initiatives and communicating about things that you love and that you are good at doing, others will notice, and that will inspire them, and they will take heed to the advice and the strategies and all the information that you want to present to them. And then the other tip is, when you know your strengths, your next level of opportunity is to really to love and appreciate the strengths of others. So instead of a lot of times in the wellness industry and field, where we give a lot of advice, and sometimes it's not necessarily, it might be kind of tailored to just one person who's a type A personality. Go do this, eat 3 to 5 vegetables servings per day, at least 20 minutes of exercise per day. Well, let's think about how it can be a little more customized to all the individual strengths that we know that our teams and our organizations have. So that's, I think, kind of some of my parting thoughts, Chuck.
Yeah. So what you're telling us is to be curious, be intentional
Uh-huh.
in order to be well.
Yeah.
Huh.
Wow.
A final poll question here. I love it. And again, this is National Wellness Institute's kind of theme for the year, is this whole idea of being curious and being intentional. I've always been a very curious individual my entire life. So I'm definitely going to be working a lot more on my intentionality. I'm happy to see that most people are actually equally looking at being both curious and intentional. Ryan, how are you going to be curious and intentional in 2021?
I'm going to be curious about how we can be inclusive to those once we start getting in person, and those who can't be there yet, who aren't comfortable yet, and be intentional about that. It might be easy to just say, all right, yes, we're going to make available what for those who can be in person, it's going to be available to you, and we're not necessarily going to worry about the experience that others might have who are tuning in remotely. So that's something that I learned during this call and that I'm going to continue to be curious and intentional about.
Yeah, and I think it's such a great way to kind of really, we use the term reimagining wellness all in 2020, and let's face it, that was a little bit well, we picked the right term for this year. And I think we really do have to get to that next level. And again, I think for the most part, wellness professionals, and especially any kind of a wellness champion, is already curious. I do think that intentionality, we've got to be much more intentional with everything that we do. I'm really looking forward to seeing where this is all going to be coming out. And luckily, I've had great conversations with our current, well, at least for one more day, Surgeon General, Dr. Jerome Adams. I've had a couple of good conversations with Dr. Murthy already as well. He's really going to be doing a lot of the same things that Dr. Adams was working on, because let's face it, Dr. Adams actually took over for Dr. Murthy the last time. So Dr. Murthy's coming into this as a second time around Surgeon General, and they've got a good relationship. And so I'm really excited about seeing what's what Dr. Adams was working on is going to continue to manifest under Dr. Murthy. So from a Surgeon General's perspective, we're really going to see a nice, solid transition. But Dr. Murthy is definitely really concerned about the loneliness factor and understands that particular piece as well as so many of the other parts. But he knows that when this health pandemic does start to be less and less about a part of the news, he knows that I'll say it this way, the wellness epidemic is really going to be at the forefront. And that's where we as all professionals together have got to unite and really work on making these things happen. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward, Ryan, to working with you and the Gallup team for years to come. Thank you so much for your time today. Ryan, have a good day, have a good week, and let's make 2021 not so bad.
That sounds great. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good evening and have a good day.